Good morning, podcasters. Let's talk about local podcasting. My name is Fuzz Martin, and this is Good Morning Podcasters, a show about marketing, advertising, social media, and public relations topics as they relate to podcasters. And we try to make it as actionable as possible because nobody likes a guru. Let's talk today about local podcasting, or specifically hyperlocal podcasting. So what is hyperlocal podcasting? Well, it's a show that's focused on a very small geography. It could be a show that's focused on all sorts of things within that geography. So it's not necessarily focused on talking about the geography. It could be focused on things within that. So maybe it's news, politics, the local music scene, food, hospitality and travel, nonprofit organizations or charities, businesses in the area, interesting people, attractions, entertainment, the art scene, a specific local industry. It could be any of those things and so much more. There's no real geographical limit either to being hyperlocal. It doesn't mean that it has to be a certain size or diameter. It could be a city, a region, a smaller municipality, something of that nature. I like to think of hyper and hyperlocal as meaning that the listeners know that the show is focused on them. So it could be hyperlocal to something like the entire tri-state area. But those listening outside of the area would just be observers outside the fishbowl and not any focus of the show. The people inside that fishbowl would know that this show is about them and their community. Make sense? For instance, I host a show called 15 Minutes with Fuzz. It's solely focused on positive people, places, and things in and around Washington County, Wisconsin. Washington County only has a population of 137,175 people. And I want each of them who listen to feel like the show is for them. I've had guests ask me why I don't promote it to all of Wisconsin, or at least to all of southeastern Wisconsin. Again, going back, I want my listeners to know that I am focused on them and what they hear is going to be meaningful within their community, not a broad-based entertainment piece. There are some cool positives that come with running a hyperlocal show. So people who are guests on the show are very likely to share it with their friends and family within the community. They're likely to share it on Facebook. They're likely to tell people about it at the grocery store or at work or while they're getting coffee at the local coffee shop. People who don't typically listen to podcasts will find a way to tune in to hear that. Whether it's on your web browser, that's what I've found a lot is that people listen through a web browser if they're not typically podcast listeners. But even in this year's podcast Spotify Wrapped, I had 25 people whose main show that they listen to is 15 Minutes with Fuzz. In comparison, James Cridland from Pod News Daily had said that 7 people had said his podcast was their number one podcast, according to Spotify Wrapped. So when you get into the hyperlocal place, it's really easy to get in front of people who don't listen to a lot of podcasts. The advertisers that you can pitch as a hyperlocal podcaster become very clear. All you have to do is drive around your community and see who you'd think would be a good fit. And you can actually get out of your car, or you could walk into the store or walk into that business and talk to a real person about why they should advertise on your podcast. You can reach out, make your offer, show them the value. It's very much like local radio advertising, except you don't have a bunch of overhead, so you can keep your prices lower and you get all those funds. There's not a lot of overhead to give out other than your podcast hosting fee and all of this cool equipment that you can buy. Another positive about doing a hyperlocal podcast is that you'll become known for what you do. Like, people will know you in your community. They'll say, oh, you're Fuzz, you do that podcast about positive things in Washington County. Oh, you're Jack, you do a show about country music in Evansville, Indiana. You can be well known for that. And also, it's very easy to advertise your show. So not just finding advertisers, but actually advertising out. If you're doing a hyper local show about something in your community, it's real easy to run some Facebook ads or Instagram ads in your local market. And people are always interested in hearing about those things that are going on in their area. And I will tell you, they're more likely to click on a podcast about something going on in their area than they are about so many other things. There are, though, some negatives about hyperlocal podcasting. One, your local listening population is finite. This isn't a huge deal if your hyperlocal is like Manhattan, but when it's Podunk, USA, don't expect 1 million listeners per episode. You might even consider less than 100 a success. But if you're connecting with people within that community, it will be successful. And since your audience reach is going to be so much lower, it's going to be harder to do things like CPM advertising, where you're getting, cost per 1,000 listeners. It's going to be hard to price your podcast that way. But if you have a popular show about an area, places like banks and real estate brokers who can make a lot of money off of one sale might have some opportunities for you. It's not as scalable as something like a broader reach global show, but you can create some real relationships. A third thing in negatives about hyperlocal podcasting, if you piss somebody off, everybody's going to know about it. As they say on the hit Canadian TV show Letterkenny, bad gas travels fast in a small town. And finally, you're likely not going to see big numbers with a hyperlocal podcast. Again, unless your hyperlocal is a big city. However, when people do find your show, they're more likely to listen to your back catalog and find out what you talked about that they're familiar with and that is important to them. If you have a hyperlocal show and you want to tell me some of the things that work for you, send me an email, fuzz@goodmorningpod.com. Or if you're looking to do a hyperlocal show and you want my opinion, send me an email. Again, fuzz@goodmorningpod.com, and we can share some ideas. Thanks for listening to Good Morning Podcasters. Get in touch by going to goodmorningpod.com. We've got a new episode of Podcasting Sucks with Jeff Townsend tomorrow morning, if you're listening on the Friday that this came out. Podcasting Sucks comes out Saturday mornings right here on the Good Morning Podcasters RSS feed. Otherwise, you can find all of the episodes for Good Morning Podcasters at goodmorningpod.com, and we will talk to you again tomorrow morning right here on Good Morning Podcasters. Thanks for listening.